Story 1. I'm not quite sure what I saw. I've been living in my home since the late 1990s, and nothing happened for many years. I do know that the previous owner died in the driveway. He was prepping for vacation and suddenly collapsed and died of an undiagnosed aortic aneurysm. Years later, his wife died in the house of cancer. When we went to this woman's viewing, there was a small box. It was white with pink fabric, and we learned that many years ago this woman had had a stillborn, and that was that baby's remains. Nothing seemed to have caught my attention until my nephew and his 2-year-old daughter and his pregnant girlfriend moved in with us. I suddenly began hearing running in the house when no one was around. I heard disturbances like the door slamming and then opening loudly. I know the wind picks up in the afternoon, but on days when I'd be out watering the yard, it would sound like the house was full of people. Just after my nephew's girlfriend gave birth, I came home and the kids were crying. It was a very hot day, so they decided to go to the park for some relief. As they left, I stood in the doorway and I heard a small child laugh, almost a giggle. I looked around and saw no one else. One day I came home from work. I sat on the chair that faces the hallway by the front door. As I took off my shoes and sat back, I saw a weird object in the hallway. It looked like doll hair. Now, I'm in my 50s, and I know doll hair when I see it. It was about 4 feet off the ground, and it was moving ever so slowly towards the front door. I looked at my nephew. He was on the couch, talking to his girlfriend. She was making dinner. And this shiny blob of golden doll hair was creeping towards the doorway. Days later, I asked my nephew about this, and he said that he remembered it, and he remembered that I was looking between something in the hallway and them, but that neither of them saw anything. They have since moved out, but I still hear noises, like I have a full house and children running up and down the hallway. One night, I was watching TV. It was windy, but I heard definite 3 knocks on the patio window. I hollered out, "Come back later." I've also seen a shadowy, static-like figure through my patio door, like it was trying to mess with some fake flowers that I'd put on my patio table. When my nephew and his little family lived with me, I got engaged. But sadly, that gentleman died 4 months after our engagement. A few days after the service for him, a very good friend of his, who had actually eulogized him, wrote me a letter that said I was a very good influence on my departed fiancé. After I read the letter, I was in the backyard, and for some reason, I decided I needed to water the plants. As I stood there and watered, I realized that I could see the color blue. My house is green. The grass is green. Everything around me was green. But why was I seeing the color blue? And then it materialized further. I could make out blue pants. No feet. No upper body. Just blue pants. Just like the favorite scrubs my fiancé liked to wear to work. He had really came back to say goodbye. Story 2. The Lonesome Patient. I work at a hospital about 20 miles from my home. I work on the second floor, and 90% of my patients are in their 80s or older. I looked after this one particular patient who was in her 90s for almost a month. Eventually, she was put on comfort measures, a title given to patients who were not going to get any better. But the move to hospice would hurt them. Day in and day out, she lived on air, it seemed, eating very little. It seemed like she was waiting on someone. Turned out her only son was on the other side of the world, and it would take him a few days to be able to come and make his last farewell. The nurses said that he was coming the next day, and told me a very vivid story of this lady's life. She wasn't big as a minute, 4'5", with a fluffy crown of white hair. She had the prettiest blue eyes I've ever seen. She had been a military wife, her husband having fought in 2 world wars. And she took her last breath just 6 hours after her son showed up. All during her hospital stay, I talked to her as I turned her and gave her drops of juice and bathed her. And I talked to her as my partner aide helped me put her in a body bag, as her room was cleaned and made ready for another patient. It felt weird, like she was still occupying that space. But I then pushed that thought out of my mind and resumed my duties on the floor. I got ready to go home. The rest of the morning was uneventful. I hopped in my car and headed down the highway to go home. It was 7:30 in the morning. The skies were overcast, so it seemed like dawn instead of around 7. I noticed movement in my rearview mirror, and when I focused on my back seat, imagine my surprise and horror when I see that same little old lady sitting in my back seat smiling at me. I almost went off the road in surprise. I screamed, "What in God's name are you doing here?" "I'm going home. I guess with you, since you were so nice to me all during my stay." The specter of this woman answered me, "You were more nice to me than my own son. He never even visited when I was sick." She looked so sad, and my heart went out to her. "Granny," I said, a bit softer this time. She looked at me with a sad longing. "You know you're dead, right?" Granny nodded. "When you dead, the world is your oyster. I have heard that you can travel all over the world in the blink of an eye. Do what you always wanted to do, but can't in the living world. Why would you want to hang around me in this small town when you can go visit all the people you've missed in your life?" And Granny looked at me and said, "Well, that's true. You're right. Maybe I should take your advice." And poof, she was gone, faded away. I sat there on the side of the road where I pulled over for just a minute. It's not every day you have a conversation with a ghost in your vehicle. I breathed a sigh of relief, put the car in gear, and drove back onto the highway towards home. I promptly forgot about the incident for several months, until a patient one night hysterically called me into her room, begging me to pull back the drapes, look into the bathroom, open the closets in her room, because she was convinced there was a person hiding in her room. This patient was getting a lot of heavy drugs, so I knew the possibility was that she was hallucinating. But I humored her and checked her room. She said, "I know I must be imagining things, but seriously, it seems so real. That little old lady keeps waking me up." I said, "The next time she comes in, just let her finish her story to you. Maybe she feels she needs to tell you something." 2 hours later, the patient frantically calls me into her room again to search the room top to bottom. This time the patient told me she listened to the lady carefully. And the woman told her that her husband had been a pilot in World War I and World War II. And that she had been waiting for her son to show up. She said the ghost had cottony white hair and was super short, and described my little old lady to a T. I quickly went out to the hallway to say a quick prayer for my little old lady ghost, and to explain to her that she needed to put aside her anger, to let go of any bitterness she may feel, maybe visit her son and say goodbye to him, but that she didn't need to be hanging around the hospital, or me, and tormenting people as they're trying to heal. Story 3. Haunted house in Kentucky. We only lived in this house for 2 months when I saw the first of 2 ghosts. I was taking a nap in the back bedroom when I was awakened by something. There was this old lady with white hair brushed back into a bun. She was wearing an apron, just standing in the doorway, staring at me. I gasped, too afraid to speak, and then she vanished. I saw her again, 10 years later, after the death of my husband. Something woke me up, and there she was, that same little old woman, standing in the doorway, wringing her hands in her apron. I wasn't afraid of her, I never was, just scared speechless. On more than one occasion, I was awoken by a man standing over me, looking down at me as I slept in my bed. He had a puzzled look on his face, wearing a green bomber jacket and a hat. He was very tall and very handsome. When I'd try to scream, he would just fade away with that same puzzled look on his face. It always felt like someone was watching me. There were other people who saw both of these people as well, including my grandson. Behind our house is a family cemetery. I sold the house some years later, and the present owners see and hear people all the time. They say at night their bed shakes. Story 4. Stone House. We bought this beautiful house, and we were fortunate enough to know the original owners personally. The house was built in the 1920s. When it was originally built, it was basically just a kitchen and a living area. The woman who owned it had been married a couple times, and her husbands were all stonemasons. They slowly added to the house over time. The first husband encased the house in natural stone, added a bedroom and a bathroom. When he passed, she remarried. Husband 2 added a hallway, additional bedrooms, and a porch. Later, the porch was enclosed to make a laundry room, sunroom. They eventually built a house next door and moved out. They began renting the property. The renter before me was an elderly woman in her 90s. She lived alone and had fallen. It was several days before anyone found her. She spent the last few weeks of her life in a nursing home, and that is when my family and I moved in. We lived there for several years, and during that time, we experienced almost daily paranormal experiences. We saw shadow people, and more than a few times we would see a white mist form. None of us saw anything while we were together. It was always when one of us was alone, but it happened almost daily. I would often wake up and find all of the kitchen cabinets open, both top and bottom cabinets. This went on for several years, and then one evening, all of us were in the family room, and the doors to a large, heavy armoire where our TV was opened all the way. We sat there, our mouths gaping, trying to figure out how this happened. All the doors and windows were closed. The floors are level. The doors latched tight. Yet somehow, they opened by themselves. We moved several years after that. And while we miss the quiet charm of the house, we don't miss the ghostly inhabitants. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, leave me a comment. I really do appreciate it. Bye.